I knew generally what I was stepping into. That being said, I did not know what I was stepping into. If I wanted to get into a good acting school, you want to build up a little bit of a resume. With the Rakugo world, the masters want none of that. My master was strict. If you can read this one person's atmosphere, their mind, that's the job of a performer. You're not playing the character, but reading the feeling of the audience.
Hey there, and thank you for tuning in. We're excited to bring you another great conversation today. If you like the show and want to support us, please hit the subscribe button so we can keep bringing you great content week after week. And if you're feeling extra generous, give this video a like and share your thoughts and comments down below. Thank you so much. And now, let's get into it. Welcome to Unpacking Japan. I'm Toby, and today we welcome Katsura Sunshine. Thank you so much for coming, for making time between your frequent trips between New York and Tokyo, where you perform Rakugo.
Yes.
The only foreign performer of Rakugo, I believe, as of today.
As of today, I am not.
You're not anymore, but you used to be for a long time, and you kind of brought the spotlight on this and brought it to Broadway, which I think was the first. And so I want to know a lot more about you and your story and how this all began. Sure. How did you get to Japan in the first place?
Sure. Yeah, I was originally a playwright and composer and theater producer in Toronto. So I was composing musicals, and my focus was Aristophanes, which is 2,500-year-old Greek comedy. Mm-hmm. And in my research, as I was producing some shows, just translations of Greek comedies, there was a scholar who wrote an article that said that 2,500-year-old Greek comedy and for 400 or 500 years old Japanese Noh and Kabuki had all these coincidental similarities. So I thought, I got to go see some Kabuki. And I don't know if you remember 25 years ago, but there was no Google, there's no YouTube, there's none of this.
And no Kabuki in Toronto.
No Kabuki in Toronto, exactly. So you had to come. If you want to see Kabuki, you have to come to Tokyo or come to Japan. And so I just came thinking I'd stay a little bit and just study Kabuki and study Noh and maybe get a little bit of inspiration and go home and continue writing my musicals. Mm-hmm. So it's just out of interest, because the Greek shows 2,500 years ago, Greek culture got buried by Roman culture, and we only know what a Greek play looks like from archaeology. Mm-hmm. And maybe there's a pot that shows a scene from a play, and that's what the costumes looked like. You don't even know what ancient Greek sounds like. But Noh and Kabuki are basically, there's a through line from when they originated to now. So if you go to Kabukiza in Tokyo, you can see Kabuki as it was done 100 years ago, 200 years ago, 300 years ago. So I was really interested in seeing a kind of ancient art form that still survived in that way. And so I was going to come, watch some Kabuki, and go back to Canada. And on my third day in Tokyo,
that was quick.
I said, I'm never going home. This place is too amazing. Yeah, I fell in love with Japan. And the rest is history.
Do you remember the first Kabuki performance you went to see there?
I don't remember which one it was, no, but it was amazing. I started with a piece of, you can see the whole thing, which is, I don't know how many hours, but you can go for one act. And I went and saw a dance, because I thought, well, the dance, you don't need the language as much. Mm-hmm. And it was just the costumes and the pageantry and just the makeup and the whole set and everything. It just blew me away. I loved it.
So after 3 days, you decided to stay here, but you're still a playwright. You write the shows in English for North American audience.
Yeah.
What was your plan then to kind of stay here? What did you decide to do?
Yeah, very little plan. There was an aimless 5 or 6 years in there. I just enjoyed Japan. And I learned some Japanese and I learned about Japanese culture. I continued writing. I mean, the good thing about writing is you can write wherever you are. Mm-hmm. So I was writing some shows, and some of my shows I was writing when I was in Japan, I sent them back to Canada, and they got produced in Canada to a greater or lesser extent. And after I'd been here 5 years, I don't know if the viewers know yakitori. Yakitori is getting more and more popular.
Yeah, I think it's getting popular overseas as well.
It is, yeah.
Grilled skewers, basically.
Yeah, the chicken skewers, the barbecue chicken. It's interesting because 25 years ago, there was no yakitori. There was not even izakaya. There's nothing in Toronto except sushi. And now I go back to Toronto. My friends say, hey, let's go to the izakaya, Sunshine. Whoa. Holy smokes. It's the izakaya is English. Yeah, yakitori. There was this yakitori shop I was going to in Yokohama where I lived. Like, I loved it so much. I was there 8 times a week, basically, twice on Sundays.
Wow.
And the owner of the shop, it was like a Rakugo maniac. And so he said, like, if you enjoy Japanese culture, you should come and see our Rakugo show. And they held it in the restaurant. They just turned the restaurant into a little theater and invited 2 young performers. And then, and the second I watched it, I was hooked. I said, this is what I was born to do.
So they move the tables around, put the stage there, and someone comes in to perform.
100%. Yep, that's what it is. Put up some chochin, which are the lanterns, and put a cushion down on the stage. And that was it. And two storytellers told 2 stories each. So there's 4 stories, 2 hours. And yeah, I was just absolutely hooked.
So for someone who's not familiar with Rakugo, how would you simply describe or explain it?
Yeah, the very short explanation or translation is traditional Japanese comic storytelling. And Rakugo is, if you want a little bit of longer explanation, it's a 400-year tradition of comic storytelling in Japan. The stories have been passed down from master to apprentice through the ages up until the present day. And the storyteller, lone storyteller, uses only 2 props, the hand towel and the fan. Mm-hmm. And these can be a bunch of objects, but using only 2 simple props tells an old story by basically very little narration, by playing characters, turning head to the left and to the right and playing characters in conversation. But before that story happens, there's something called a makura, which is a pillow. And that is a lot like stand-up comedy. It's self-introduction, some self-deprecating humor, some observational humor, a chance to get to know what kind of audience you have, to become friends with the audience, to make the audience like you so they want to hear your story. And eventually when you decide the story, because often you decide the story while you're talking, while you're on stage, I think, maybe I'll do this story. It'll be good for the audience. Yeah, 100%. So you feed off the audience for a while, and then once you decide which story you want to tell, you slowly lead your jokes or your routine into the topic of the story, and then kind of seamlessly start the story, ideally. So go ahead.
It's something you do by yourself. It's only one person on stage performing multiple characters.
Yes.
So it's different than Manzai, which will be 2 comedians.
That'll be 2-person comedy usually, yeah. Sometimes more. Rakugo is alone. And however, like stand-up comedy, you could be part of a set of people. It could be 5 performers in a night or however many. But on stage, you're alone, kneeling on the cushion and playing different characters, yeah.
You said that historically it was a master that kind of has a story and kind of passes it on to the apprentice who will become a master, passes it on. So even today, are they still the same stories as back then?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I always say the closest equivalent to what a Rakugo storyteller, Rakugo ka, you say in Japanese, a Rakugo storyteller in the West would be like a jazz musician. Because a jazz musician has like the standards, right? There's several hundred songs that are considered the standards. They kind of memorize those. And then when you go to the concert, you choose whichever ones the audience might like or whichever ones the band wants to play or whatever it is. So you have a library of songs. Same thing, we have a library of stories. So these stories could be 100, 200, 300 years old, and they're passed down orally, A-U-R-A-L-L-Y. Hourly, like the master tells the story and the apprentices listen. Traditionally, the master would say the story 3 times in front of the apprentice, and the 4th time the apprentices have to say the story back. So you memorize the through line.
Limited time.
Yeah, limited time. But so there's no official scripts traditionally. But so there's that. So I'd say there's about 300 traditional stories that we all share. There's about 1,000 professional storytellers right now in Japan, divided between Tokyo, which is called Edo Rakugo, because Tokyo used to be called Edo, and Osaka Rakugo, which is called Kamigata Rakugo. So between these two traditions, basically living and working in Tokyo or in Osaka, there's about 1,000 storytellers right now.
Comedy is kind of said to be originating in Osaka, and most of modern comedians in Japan also are from Osaka or learn here. Is it the same also in Rakugo?
Yeah, well, the reason is normal, everyday people in Osaka are funnier than most comedians. So it's a good training ground for comedy. Also because I think it's traditionally the merchant and business area, as opposed to Tokyo used to be the samurai city and Osaka used to be the merchant city. So people were always joking around to get better relations to have good relations for business and that kind of thing. So yes, now with the history of Rakugo, it's very murky because the stories originated from little anecdotes that Buddhist monks would put in their sermons to wake the audience up or just to entertain them and get them to listen, that kind of thing. And you can trace one monk, his name was Anrakuan Sakuden, and he collected a bunch of these stories. And so this collection is actually a book with these anecdotes, and a lot of them we still have in the form of Rakugo stories now. So we know a lot of them were based on stories that he collected. However, they point to 3 different people as being the first ever actual professional Rakugo storytellers. Mm-hmm. One is in Osaka, one is in Kyoto, and one is in Tokyo. So apparently, this art form originated with 3 different people in 3 different places, which unrelated to each other. It just seems very highly unlikely. But I've never seen a really good explanation as to how these 3 people started the same kind of thing at the exact same time.
So somewhere
with no internet, right?
With no internet, somewhere in history, the truth has been lost. But in your case. Going back to that night in the izakaya, you see that performance for the first time.
Oh, listen, a lot of the truth about me has been lost as well.
In that izakaya.
Too much drinking. Yeah. Used to be here.
After you see that performance and you kind of get hooked, how was the journey to become a Rakugo performer? Where did it start the day after?
Yeah, so it's exactly the day of, exactly. I told the owner of the yakitori shop, Ken-san, I said, "This is what I want to do. I'm in show business. I'm in comedy. This is in my blood. I know I can do this. I want to do it." And he said, "Impossible, because you have to do a very strict 3 or 4 year apprenticeship. It's called shugyo in Japanese, apprenticeship. You go to your master's house and do the cleaning, the laundry, the fold kimonos. Master gets mad at you every day." And it's basically, it's wax on, wax off, but it's real servitude. And he said, there's no foreigners there's no such thing as a foreign Rakugo storyteller. So, and you can't write or read there's all kinds of reasons he gave me that it'd be impossible. No master would take me. So that's how you become a storyteller. I said, okay, well, that sounds like a pretty big hurdle. But as I was more involved in the Rakugo world and I made friends with Rakugo storytellers who were kind of my age, like a lot of them said, listen, there's no foreigner. There's nobody who's not Japanese. However, if a master takes you, there's nothing to say that you couldn't do it. A lot of them said that. So for about 3 years, I was a Rakugo fan. I just went to tons of shows. And sometimes I participated as an amateur, but they let me participate in their show as a kind of, I played accordion and did a little bit of accordion comedy. It's actually an art form that at the Rakugo Yosei, at the theater, sometimes they put an accordion comedian in the lineup in between Rakugo storytellers. So I did a little bit of accordion comedy. But then I got to know like how Rakugo storytellers interact in the dressing room too, the kind of greetings they gave each other, the way they introduced themselves, the way that whole world ticked behind the scenes, which was almost more fascinating than what was happening on stage. It was, they're both incredible, but like backstage, like depending on your rank, it's all seniority, and depending on your rank, your function in the dressing room changes. Like if you're the lowest that day, then you got to make sure that everyone has tea. You bring out their kimonos. You would, if there's a higher master there, you would help them dress in their kimono if they want to. Some of them refuse, but some of them want you to do it. You help them get dressed. And then you would be going out and doing the first story. It has to be about 10 minutes long, and so you have to make sure you don't go over time, that kind of thing. And if you're in the middle, there's different functions. If you're the master, you're probably going last. You're probably the headliner, that kind of thing. But so you could have a set of Rakugo storytellers who have never met each other. Okay. And they'll get to the dressing room. Maybe the producer put them together. They'll come into the dressing room, and again, it's just like jazz musicians. The jazz musicians don't have to ever have played together. They could go, okay, here's the songs we'll do, here's the keys, and we'll wing it from there. And you watch them as an audience member, and it's a show.
It just looks like it's been rehearsed many times.
100%. So with the Rakugo storytellers too, they introduce each other, and so as soon as you know who's ranked where, and you kind of know that before you go, but you would look into that. But when you introduce yourself, you kind of say that kind of stuff. Who is your master? The identifying things. Who's your master? And then someone might ask you how many years, that kind of thing. So automatically decides kind of the order you go in. Then the master, the headliner will say, I might want to do this story, but then they'll always ask the most junior person, because the most junior person will have the least number of stories that they can do. You'll do like a 2-minute meeting, and everybody will say, okay, here's kind of what we'll do. So then you make sure that like there's no two people doing a thief story, or arguing couple story, or a story where children come in, or that kind of thing. You make sure that for the audience, you've got a proper range of stories where it's not, unless you want it to be, unless it's ghost story day and everyone's doing a ghost story, you tend to want to make different stories so that the audience gets a good range of stories, that kind of thing. So it's fascinating because, like five people never met each other, get together and can put a full show. And from the audience perspective, it looks like that whole show. These people perform together all the time, that kind of thing. So this was just fascinating, and it's the way they introduce each other, and the way the rank plays so much of a role in the formality of it all. But then they always have an after party. The performers always go and have a drink, just the performers and maybe the key staff that day or something like that, the people that put on the show maybe, but there's always a drinking party after. And then a lot of the formality, the most senior person will just say, okay, let's lose the formality and just have fun. And then they start talking about Rakugo inside stuff, which I'm sure is like any art form. Comedians probably, like when they get together, they talk about comedy, or musicians, same thing. And being sometimes getting invited to that was also, this is because it's so formalized in the dressing room. Still fun. There's still a lot of joking around. I mean, in their hearts, we're all comedians, but there is a lot of formality in the dressing room, and then that just gets kind of lost at the drinking party, and that's a lot of fun as well.
So for 3 years, you get to experience this a little bit, and you get even more hooked.
100%.
Your Rakugo friends were saying, well, there's no foreigners, but if you find a master, there's nothing from stopping you.
Nothing's stopping you.
So how did you find your master?
Yeah, and actually, there was a foreigner before me. 100 years ago, there was an Australian named Henry Black who came to Japan with his father when he was like 7 years old. I think his father was running a newspaper in Yokohama or something like that. And this guy became Kairakute Braku. That's his stage name. And so he was the first. I can't remember when he was born, but he died in 1923. I remember that because it's the same year as the great earthquake in Tokyo, in Kanto. So he was the first. And then, sorry, what was your question?
How did you end up finding your master?
Yeah, I went to Osaka because I wanted to, because the Osaka Rakugo tradition has a lot of differences to the Tokyo tradition. So I wanted to get a sense of that. And I went to Osaka, and I was recommended by a storyteller named Katsura Pompoko, who I'd gotten to know. She said, you should check out the chairman of the Osaka Rakugo Association, Kamigata Rakugo Association, very famous television personality whose name at the time was Katsura Sunshine, and she said he's really number one, hilarious and very powerful, and also he writes his own stories and very open to new kinds of things. He would be the kind of person who'd be open to taking someone who was not Japanese.
To modernize the tradition.
Yeah. Yeah, in a big way. He was modernizing it. Not modernizing it in thinking that it's getting old, but just like open to different aspects of Rakugo. So I went, just on her recommendation, I went to see him, and it was the second time I just fell in love. Like his stories, he writes all his own stories. So he wasn't doing traditional stories. The body of 300 stories that I told you about, he's written his own. He's in fact written over 300 stories now.
Wow.
And a lot of storytellers do his stories. And this is the thing, it's unlike stand-up comedy. With Rakugo, these stories are shared. So even if you make your own stories, other people are going to do your stories. They're kind of shared. So the stand-up comedy part at the beginning, the introduction part, you don't really share. Well, there's some shared stories there, but for the most part, if you make up your own material, other people are not going to do it.
Mm-hmm.
But the actual stories, if you're composing your own stories, the attitude is you want other storytellers doing your stories. It's not a fight over, what do you call it? Like intellectual property.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, if more storytellers do it, it's a validation that you've written a good story. And if the next generation starts doing it, you're actually creating, which I think my master is, you're creating the future traditional Rakugo stories. So these stories are going to live on. And I think my master has just so many stories that like he's centered in Osaka, but even Tokyo storytellers do his stories. So I think he's creating the traditional Rakugo of the future.
So maybe in 100 years, he'll be like the pivoting point of Rakugo history at this point in time.
Yeah, he'll be one pivoting point, 100% for sure. Yeah, he will be one of those pivoting points, yeah.
So on the recommendation of Katsura Pompoko, you go to try to meet him and introduce yourself and say you want to become his apprentice.
Well, first I went to see a couple shows, and then I just got hooked. And finally got up the courage to ask him to take me as his apprentice. And I waited. I did it the traditional way. I put on a kimono. It wasn't as flashy as this kimono here, but I put on a kimono and I waited at the dressing room. The traditional way, you would go to his house and ring the doorbell. And that's like 100 years ago, 200 years ago. If you went to someone's house all of a sudden, today,
you
probably wouldn't be too appreciated.
Yeah.
Police
is right around the corner.
Exactly. Yeah. But I just waited at the dressing room where I knew where his show was going to be. And when he got into the car, I got down on my hands and knees and I said, "Master, please take me as your apprentice." And he said, "Okay, whatever." And just said, come into the theater. And I think he was very surprised. I think he was like, "Who's this guy?" Right? Who's a foreigner wearing a kimono? That kind of thing. And I remember Katsura Sunshine, who would later become one of my seniors, my older brother. But at the time, he was one of the apprentices. He came up to me when I was in the dressing room and he said, "All right, if you're that serious about being part of this world, can I give you a tip?" I said, "Yeah, sure." He said, "All right, now, so you're wearing a kimono. It's raining outside. You shouldn't kneel on the rainy ground under any circumstances in your kimono, because now you've come in and here's the dressing room and it's very clean tatami and you're kneeling on the same tatami with the same kimono that you just kneeled on the rainy ground. Now you get up and a master or our master is going to come in with his $10,000 to $20,000 kimono and kneel in the same place. And through your fault, through your responsibility, his kimono is going to get dirty.
Wow.
So you have to think about those things before you do it. I said, "Oh, this is great." And I thought, "Wow, I'm not yet accepted as an apprentice, but they're already giving me like, what is it?
You open the door.
I wouldn't say he's mad at me, but like I'm getting that real experience of a senior giving me a stern warning about something." I thought, "Oh, that's I'd like to say thank you very much. I'll be sure not to kneel outside in my kimono again." And then his senior, whose name was Sampu at the time, his name has changed since, but his senior came up. He said, "Yeah, that's really good advice, but, he shouldn't be the one telling you that because Sankin's kimono is all polyester and they don't cost more than $30. And everyone around laughed, and that was it. And that was such a good slice of the Rakugo world. It's like you got to teach the next generation, and you have to be stern, and sometimes people get really upset with you. But in the end, everything turns into a laugh and, lesson learned, and we go on. And I wasn't an apprentice yet, but I got to experience that right away. The master was in a different room somewhere at the time. Mm-hmm. But just experiencing that kind of interesting camaraderie among the Rakugo brothers, because you become part of a family. You receive the name from your master, and you're part of his Rakugo family. So he's my artistic father, and all of the apprentices that studied under him are my brothers and sisters, basically.
So that's why you all have the last name Katsura.
So all the last name Katsura, yes,
Rakugo
exactly.
family, and then he attributed you the name Sunshine.
He gave me the name Sunshine, exactly. Yeah, we're skipping ahead here, but yeah, exactly.
So back to that room, you get your first lecture from
your senpai,
and then
don't kneel on the ground in a kimono, which to me now is ridiculously obvious. Like, I can't believe I did that, but that's the thing. Like when you're just kind of living in Japan, if you're living in Japan and you're not, okay, I want to be polite, so I learn certain polite,
like sonkeigo,
grammatical forms, not even sonkeigo, but like, which is more polite, but just even desmas. Okay, that's teinego. That's polite. They say that's polite language. And you just go along with that. Like Japanese people in general will not, unless you ask them specifically to, they won't really correct you if you do something wrong, because it's like, it's not your fault, and they don't want to make you feel bad. It's just that kind of thing. So you can have a lot of gaps in your learning unless you really make a point to be attentive to things. So I think before I became an apprentice, there were a lot of gaps in my learning. Once you become an official apprentice, there will be no more gaps. My master was strict.
So what was the moment he officially accepted you? Was there like a specific ceremony? Was there specific criteria that you needed to meet for him to accept
and that's a fascinating question, because I was just performing for 70 students from Harvard Business School yesterday who had a trip to Japan. I got asked the same question, and it's fascinating because if I wanted to get into a good acting school, Berkeley or whatever the good ones are in the United States or in Europe or whatever, you want to start acting when you're in high school. You want to build up a little bit of a resume. Maybe you want to read some books like Stanislavski and different acting methods. So when you go to audition for the acting school, you have a resume. You say, I've already done this. And when you do your audition, they say, obviously this person's performed. They know about certain basics of acting, that kind of thing. Now we can see potential. With the Rakugo world, the masters want none of that.
A blank sheet of paper.
They much prefer someone who actually never saw Rakugo before and saw it for the first time and said, you're my first Rakugo, but I thought you were amazing and I'd like to learn more about Rakugo. Can I be your apprentice? They much prefer that.
Okay.
It's fascinating in that way. And there's even, because there's a lot of Rakugo hobbyists in Japan, and there's Rakugo clubs in universities, and quite a few Rakugo storytellers started out doing Rakugo as amateurs in universities, and then they go and they ask a master, and they think the same way as we do in the West. They say to the master, I was in the Ochiken, which is the Ochiken is the Rakugo club in university, and I already know 20 stories, and you say that kind of thing to the master, and they like the masters. Really, they'll take them, but they really want to run. That's because first, before teaching them the basics of Rakugo, they have to erase all the kind of amateur habits that people who are doing it as a hobby have picked up.
And it's much harder to erase a bad habit than
it's just harder, and plus they think they know a lot about Rakugo where they don't. That's what the masters think. It's like, oh my god, this is gonna be frustrating. So, and to tell you the truth, like one of my seniors said something that really left an impression on me. He said, in my case, I fell in love not with Rakugo, I fell in love with our master. He said, if our master had been a carpenter, I would have become a carpenter. I fell in love with this. I wanted to be under the tutelage, and I wanted to be beside this human being for the rest of my life. he inspired me. And so whatever he was, I would have followed. And there's people on that side of it too, that they're just so inspired by the master that they eventually study with, that Rakugo is almost a side thought in that way.
So he accepts you. He's happy that you're not kind of pre-formatted to certain type of Rakugo. And he's like, maybe we can do something with him.
Yeah. He didn't accept me right away. It took about 8 months. He said, you can come to wherever I'm performing. And at the time, he had a very famous television show on. So it wasn't Rakugo, but he had a very famous television show on. It was called Shinkon-san Irashai. Do you know that show?
No.
It's called Newlyweds Welcome. And he would just interview 2 sets of newlyweds on how they met and their romance story and then how they eventually got married. He would do 2 sets for maybe 15 minutes each, and that's a half-hour show. And this show had been on up until 2 years ago. It was on for over 50 years.
Wow.
It was, I think it started in the year I was born. So I'm 54. So probably like it's been on for now. It was in the Guinness Book of World Records for the longest running television program with the same host. And my master retired from the show 2 years ago, I think. So there's a new host now. So that record has stopped. But at the time, and this is super famous. Here's the thing: he interviews the 2 couples, and as soon as they say something remotely sexual or remotely risque, he falls out of his chair.
Like literally falls
out of his chair. And so he's programmed to fall out of that chair 2 to 3 times each interview. And Japanese people got in front of the television set every Sunday to wait for him to fall out of the chair, basically. But his timing of falling out of the chair, you know it's coming, and it's just,
I'll have to
you
watch
know it's
that.
coming, and then it happens. Yeah, it's hilarious. But anyway, he's recording this every week. So that was the easiest place to go meet him. So I just went, and I'd waited in front of the entrance to the TV station, and his car would come, and I'd say, "Ohayou gozaimasu, good morning." And he'd say, "Oh." I'd follow him in. And then the dressing room where he got his makeup on and all that was a bit crowded. So I had to stand out in the hallway. And I basically stand in front of the dressing room for two hours while they were preparing for the performance. Then he'd come out and he'd go and do the show. And I got to watch that in the wings, that was incredible. That was fascinating how they put that all together. And then when he finished, he'd change. And then he might say 1 word or 2 words to me or ask me a question about English, but usually nothing. And we'll go together to the car, and he'd say, "Come back next week if you want, or come back next week if you have time."
He wanted to see if you're really, really willing to kind of
100%. There was that. So yes, and that's my next point, is that I was studying at the time at Osaka University of Arts. Just studying kind of traditional Japanese comedy with this professor who knew a lot about Rakugo and Manzai and all that. And he knew I wanted to become an apprentice, so he was following my whole journey here. Mm-hmm. And that I'd asked, and I was being, asked to wait in limbo. He didn't say yes, he didn't say no. I asked this professor, I said, "You know what? I'm not sure. I think I'm in the way there. I'm always standing in the hall for like a couple hours, and while this TV show is everybody's running around, but I don't know, should I go every week? Maybe I should just go every once a month or something like that. I don't know." And he said, wait a minute. What does the master say to you when you greet him at the end? And he says, "Well, come next week if you want." And he said, "Take that as an order. You are being tested. You don't come here to school. You can be sick and whatever. You make sure you do not miss a day. If he says come, if you want, you got to go." And I thought, oh, that's what the thinking is. Like, so I realized after doing my apprenticeship for 3 years that standing out in the hall is about 1/3 of what you do as an apprentice for your 3 years anyway, just waiting to be called upon. So it was nobody around the TV station, nobody around with the other apprentices there. Nobody would think it's weird that if someone wanted to become an apprentice, they'd just be standing there, just say hello to everyone, just smile. No, totally normal activity. But so I really have to thank this professor for, because I might, it's a Western way of thinking. It's like, well, I'm just in the way. I'm not doing anything. Maybe I'll skip it.
And he pushed you to wait
He just
until
said,
the end.
do not vary from that weekly habit of yours of going there and staying there the whole time. You saying good morning and you saying otsukare-sama deshita at the end of it, saying, how do you translate otsukare-sama deshita? However you translate it.
Thank you for your hard work, or thank you for your good performance, or
something like that. Yeah, whatever it is. He said, no, that's everything. That's it. And
8 months later,
yeah, 8 months later. 8 months later, he said, you don't have to join. I'll teach you if you want. But if you want to be a professional Rakugo storyteller, if you want the name Katsura and be part of the history of Rakugo and part of our family, then you got to move into the dormitory I have, an apartment I have for apprentices who are under apprenticeship. And, we studied together for 3 years. But he was very kind. He said, don't rush your decision because it's a big decision. You could tell me now. You could study with me as an amateur for a year and then decide you want to join. I'll take you then. I'm not pressuring you. There's no time limit on this offer. And I said, yeah, Master, I would like to start tomorrow. And he said, all right, then start next month. And so I became part of the family.
So 3 years apprenticeship is what was next. Did you know what you were stepping into?
Yeah, I knew generally what I was stepping into. That being said, I did not know what I was stepping into. When you actually do it, it's fascinating. One of my Rakugo storyteller friends said, if you're actually going to do this and you become the apprentice to a master, just go into it with the attitude that you're going to jail. You're going to prison for 3 years. There's no decision that you make on your own. Don't think about yourself. Just do what you're told. Time will pass and it'll be finished. And that was actually a very accurate description of psychologically what it feels like. Now, that being said, it's an incredible learning experience being beside a great master every day for every waking hour. Despite the fact that, you get on his nerves. But the master getting upset with the apprentices is more like, that's part of your function. It's just, he's doing performances. So he's dealing with the producers, he's dealing with agents, he's dealing with patrons, sponsors, all kinds of people. He has to bow to all these people, right? They're osewa ni natteru, right? He has to be thankful towards all of them. So there's got to be a place for frustration to go. So he gets frustrated with you because you're the outlet. It's part of your.
You were explaining that a big part of the apprenticeship is you basically going to the master's house and cleaning and folding the kimono and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
What are the things you learn generally throughout these 3 years in addition to those?
Well, as far as, first of all, learning how to fold kimonos, learning how to clean the master's place to his liking, that kind of thing. Basically, they say spend your 3 years focused on the master, learning to basically read his mind. In Japanese, they say kuki o yomu, which means read the wind, which is read the master's mind. If you can get to a spot where you can do everything the master wants without him having to say it, if you can read this one person's atmosphere, their mind, whatever they're feeling, whatever they're thinking, then when you go in front of an audience, you'll be able to observe, because that's the job of I think comedians will say the same thing, but that's the job of a performer, is not playing the character, but reading the feeling of the audience and making sure that they're paying attention, that you're saying something that jives with what their mood is right now, whatever the atmosphere of the
audiences.
Yeah, and of the theater, of the space, of everything. Yeah. So some people think, well, what does cleaning and folding kimonos have to do with performing Rakugo? And I'll say, no, it has everything to do with performing Rakugo. Now, what do you learn about Rakugo? You learn about, they say in Japanese, gei o nusumu, which is steal the art. So the master spends very little time teaching you, but you're with him, you observe, you imitate, You choose the stories you like, you learn them, then say, Master, I've learned this story, and he'll have you do it sometimes in front of him, and then he'll give you some tips. He'll give some tips. He'll instruct you on how it's properly performed. And then at some point he'll say, okay, correct this, and this, but it looks good. So if he tells you it looks good or you can do it, then that's your story. You have the right to do that story forever. And then you make it your own. So when you're learning it, you have to imitate the master's way of doing it. Basically, exactly to the word and to the gesture and that kind of thing. Once it's your own, then you're able to adapt the story to your own liking. So that's the process.
And you do this for 3 years on and on and on until you're to a level where he basically says you're free to go and perform.
No, yeah, it's just so fascinating because that's such a Western way of thinking of it. But no, it doesn't matter your level, really. One of my seniors said something fascinating. He said, listen, if you want to take it to the extreme, you don't have to learn one story during your 3 years of apprenticeship. Just concentrate on the menial chores we're doing for our master. Make that your art, because there's been plenty of time to learn stories later. So nobody holds to that. Everybody learns stories. And we're actually performing during apprenticeship. As soon as you know one story, the master might put you on the first 10 minutes of the show. But basically, once the time passes, because you're not expected to be, you're not even scratching the surface during apprenticeship. Mm-hmm. So then there's no ceremony at the end. Basically, it's okay. Get lost, he'll say.
Do you get your name at the end of the?
No, you don't. You get your name at the very beginning. I got mine within a month. So even that has nothing. There's no test. It's none of that. It's basically, you get your name very early on. I got mine in a month. Some masters wait a little bit longer, but basically it's at the very beginning of your apprenticeship. It's like getting a driver's license and then saying, okay, I gave you your license, so you better learn to drive now. So it's a bit backwards in that way. Unexpectedly so. And that's like even Japanese people who do different Japanese arts, like tea ceremony and that kind of thing. They're surprised to hear that because you earn your name in some of the Japanese mm-hmm. arts. But no, you do nothing to earn anything in Rakugo.
So why Sunshine?
Sunshine his name was Katsura Sunshine at the time. Now his name he ascended to his master's name in a big ceremony since then. But his name was Katsura Sunshine. San is the word for 3, and shi is Eda, branches. So he was Katsura 3 branches, if you want to put it mm-hmm. into English. And with the tradition of Rakugo, you receive one of the kanji of your master's first name too, so that you can be associated with his family. Because there's lots of Katsura families who have the same last name. So my master gave everyone the 3, the san, and my master wanted a name that would be understood not just in Japan but all over the world, because he envisioned me performing Rakugo all over the world once I'd finished my apprenticeship. So he gave me the kanji for shine, which is kagayaku in Japanese, and then he gave it the English reading, shine. So my name is a pun in Japanese. It's san, shine, 3 shines. I'm basically Katsura San, 3 shines.
How soon after the apprenticeship did you start kind of going performing and kind of having maybe your own shows or like headlining shows?
Yeah, headlining would take a while, I guess, but little by little, even during apprenticeship, when you have more apprentices under you and they can take more of the work, then the master might say, you can go ahead and work. So, if I was invited to perform someplace, I'd perform. So even then, I guess if I was the only performer, you'd say it's headlining. Mm-hmm. It's not, it's a very vague process. It's whatever work you get.
So let's talk about the shows.
Yeah.
You mentioned before, usually maybe a few performances line up and each of them has their bit.
Yeah.
What does a bit look like for you when you prepare your performance and you kind of go on stage? What are the steps? And also you mentioned very early in our conversation, you have to use these 2, the tenugui and the sensu during those performances. Why those 2 objectives and how do they kind of come into play during your performance?
Yeah, that's a great question. First of all, and this comes back to why are we wearing a kimono? And basically, when you're performing, you don't want to have anything that's very distracting. Stand-up comedians will often wear very ordinary clothing, right? They wear jeans and a t-shirt, or some dress up a little bit flashy in a suit or something, that kind of thing. But a lot of them, the majority, I would say, of stand-up comedians just have really ordinary sweater, ordinary pants or jeans, that kind of thing, running shoes, whatever. And that's very much the spirit of Rakugo, because in the Edo period, men left the house in a kimono. And if you had a kimono, the two things you would definitely have on you would be these two, the hand towel and the fan, basically, because it's hot in Tokyo and you need to cool yourself off. But these are the objects you'd have on you. So if Rakugo were born today, you'd be wearing jeans and a t-shirt, and you'd be using, I don't know, an iPhone and a watch as props, or whatever we have these days that everybody has on them. So that's the reason. Now these have become kind of special items because they're traditional, but it's something that was it's just an ordinary person who walked off the street kneeling on why do we kneel on a cushion? Because everybody kneeled on cushions in the Edo period. That's how you sat to talk to people, and it's just normal everyday life. So it's very much like stand-up comedy. It's like the only thing that's special is that you have a mic. So for the storyteller, like you just someone who walked off the street is telling you a story now. So nothing distracting about your appearance. That's why we do it. That's why we do that now. And so these props became things like chopsticks. Right? You're eating right? This could be a letter or something that you're writing. Could be a wallet, that kind of thing. You're not constantly using these. Sometimes for accent, you throw in something animation with a prop, and it just changes things up. It's basically accent.
And your performance has two parts: the free part at the beginning and the story part.
That's right. Yeah.
And in the free part, you said that you kind of read the air a little bit, read the room, and you maybe engage a little bit with the audience.
Yeah, I do a little bit. Yeah, engage with the audience, but certainly have the feeling of engaging the audience, even if you're not looking for them to be responding in a certain way. When I'm in New York, I teach them a bit of Japanese, and then they can say it, and they get a feeling of the language a little bit. But yeah, you're basically free to do your own material.
And those stories, those 300 stories you mentioned a few times now, what are they actually about? What kind of stories can we picture if we think of Rakugo?
Yeah, Rakugo stories are interesting in that, number one, there's very little narration. There's very little like once upon a time, there was this and there was that. You glean the situation from the conversation. So for example, if I was to start a story, I'd be like, konnichiwa, hello, anybody there? Hello, oh, I was wondering who it was. It's you, Kiroku, come on in. I was talking to your mother and she's very upset. She says you do not want to work. You cannot keep a job. I've heard you've already quit 10 jobs. Who's quit 10 jobs? Oh, sorry. So you've only quit 9 jobs. I've quit 11 jobs. Oh, it's even worse. You should start working for a living. Yeah, Jinbei-san, I want to work. I want to do a job. If I could find the perfect job for me, I would be happy to do it. All right. What's the perfect job for you then? I have working conditions. All right, tell me your working conditions. I haven't explained anything, right? But it's probably like a junior guy coming into a senior guy, whether it's an uncle or a senior. He's been asked by the mother to do something about my son. He's terrible. And they're getting into this discussion. You don't need anybody to tell you what's happening. Even this, like, it's someone knocking at the door and then someone answering the door. Like everything in Rakugo is like built to be very easily understood immediately. But I think it's rare to have a storytelling tradition that doesn't have a narrator for the most part.
But it's kind of interesting because you do give very little information about the context, and still very quickly you get hooked in and you start picturing that conversation.
100%. 100%. Yeah, you get hooked quick.
And those stories usually last 10 minutes?
They can be A short one is 3 or 4 minutes. Long ones can be like half hour.
Oh, wow.
My master's written like 40-minute plus stories, so they vary in length. My stories that I do generally are between 10 and 20, 25 minutes, basically.
And the topics generally relate to maybe everyday life or situations people they encounter. It's like the normal person's kind of talk and a comedic way to reflect on everyday life.
Yeah. Of the Edo period or early Meiji period. It's basically stories of like all these quirky characters from the neighborhood. And the other thing is, I said there's not very many. There's not much narration. There's no good versus evil. There are no evil characters in Rakugo. There are some who do, not so good stuff. But I mean, there's no characters. They're all kind of lovable. There's no characters that are loathsome. I think any Rakugo storyteller just loves all the characters, and that's how they play them. So even a thief will come into the house, but they'll bumble everything. They won't be able to steal the husband and wife who they're stealing from. There's a story like the thief is there. He's putting in the kimonos to steal the kimonos into the furoshiki cloth, and then who comes home first? I can't remember if it was the husband comes home first or the wife. I think the wife comes home. No, the husband comes home first. Thief hides in the hole in the kitchen. And the husband's like, oh, my wife's planning on leaving me. It's like, oh, she got another man, something like that. So he goes, he's got a monologue there. The wife comes home and he gets all upset. Why are you planning to leave? And she said, what are you talking about? Well, here's the kimonos. So I didn't fold those kimonos. And she says, well, maybe it's you who's planning to leave me. And they get into a big fight and they bring up a couple things from the past, which would indicate that their relationship was not so hot, and the thief starts to feel bad that he's caused this fight. Finally, he comes out and says, look, she's not leaving, and you're not leaving, and you're not leaving. They're not leaving. You guys nothing to do with each other. And they say, oh, really? Really? Oh, that's a big relief. Oh, glad to know that. Who are you? And why did you just come out of our kitchen, right? So I just dropped in. They realize he's a thief. And they go on, different arguments, all this, but finally they say let's settle our differences with a drink, and they start drinking. And they say to the thief, become friends with the thief. And they say you should just stay the night. And the thief's already half passed out, and then so then they become friends. And at the very end, when they're all going to sleep, the thief says, oh, be sure you lock the door. You never know who's out there. And that's the punchline. So that comes to the other part of a Rakugo story. It always ends in a punchline that kind of ties the whole story together. It might not be the biggest laugh of the story, but it ties the whole story together in a very elegant way.
That's the ochi, right?
It's called ochi, which is punchline, yeah.
I was reading that traditionally speaking, there were like specific types of ochi that were used. Are they still in use today, or is it changing a little bit to adapt to like modern?
Yeah,
story?
I get that in my Instagram a lot. In my comments, they'll ask me which category of ochi was that. That is a very academic way of breaking down the different kinds of punchlines. Where it's like a thinking punchline where you actually have to think about it a bit, or it could be shigusa ochi, which is more the action, a bodily action rather than a word that is the punchline, or it could be like a logical punchline, or this kind of, there's, 7 kinds or 12 kinds or something like that. That, if you read about Rakugo, that comes out. Mm-hmm. I think most Rakugo storytellers could not name you 3 different kinds of ochi. We don't really think about it that way. It just, because every story that we learn comes with the punchline. It's just like a joke. Like if you hear a joke and you laugh at it, you don't think after, which category of punchline was that joke? It's the same thing. So, but scholars who have studied it have broken it down. And when I read it, I will confess that I think it's pretty interesting. But I haven't read that for like 20 years. So I don't know.
What I'm interested in is you've actually been able to take Rakugo and bring it to Broadway.
Yeah.
And it's a traditional Japanese comedic performance.
Yeah.
The stories are from the Edo period and Meiji period.
Yeah.
How does this all translate to English? How have you adapted those stories for a North American audience or an international audience, and being able to translate those puns and those kind of punchlines that
yeah.
making the audience laugh?
Yeah, that is a fantastic question. And number one, don't adapt them at all. Basically, just translate, and it's direct translation. Rakugo is fascinatingly universal. The stories, I think, because they're old stories, Japanese people now and Japanese people in the Edo period, it was still two completely different cultures. Mm-hmm. And yet these stories have survived to entertain people even 400 years later. And I think because of that, they speak to something really, really basic. So you don't have to know anything about Japan. Some people say, like, oh, how do people know what a nagaya is? And a nagaya was basically an apartment complex, but instead of being like an apartment building, it's like it goes
very
side
long
to side.
sideways.
It's not it's landscape. It's not portrait, but basically it forms a kind of community. And there's all these standard characters that come out of the nagaya. But as they said, well, what if people don't know what a nagaya is? Then how are they going to understand Rakugo? And I said, yeah, okay, they don't know the exact shape of these apartments, perhaps, but if the walls are thin and the couple next door is arguing and you can hear and there's misunderstandings, you don't need to know the shape of the building to understand that kind of humor. And every culture around the world throughout history, I think, can relate to thin walls and you overhearing something that you shouldn't be overhearing, that kind of thing. And that's where the humor of Rakugo really lies. Well, if you know a little bit about Japanese culture in the Edo period, you can appreciate certain finer points of Rakugo. But the actual humor does not rest in that kind of knowledge, in that erudition or that kind of esoteric knowledge whatsoever. It's that's why you get 3 generations of the same family coming to Rakugo performances: grandma, grandpa, parents, and kids, and they're all laughing together at the same jokes, at the same funny situations, that kind of thing. So it's very universal.
So even you have the 3 generations of one culture laughing at the same jokes.
Yeah.
What about international audiences? Do you also notice like they laugh at the exact same jokes? And
basically, like what I have my show, now it's my 6th year on Broadway. My show once a month, and I'm performing in Tokyo, and I'm performing in Tokyo in English as well, but I'm performing Japanese in Japan a lot. And it's 90% people are laughing at the same things at the same time in the same way. It's now look, I know humor can change. I'm Canadian, and when I go to London and listen to a stand-up comedian, 1/3 of what's funny I don't even understand. And we're talking about the same language, and Canada still has, I think we still have Queen Elizabeth on our money, for crying out loud. We're still halfway from being a colony, for crying out loud. So still very much the same culture. I studied Shakespeare in university, which is the UK, which is England, whatever. And I still don't understand. So even though it's the same language and the same culture, because I wasn't born and raised in London, and that's what they're referring to, I don't get it. And yet here's something that's 400 years old, and it's Japanese, so it's a different language, different culture that it is even today in Japan, that kind of thing. And yet it's universal. It's really kind of a miracle of comedic performance.
For someone that has now worked and practiced comedy, and specifically Rakugo, for so many years, how does it make you look at other types of comedy like manzai or even international comedy? You were saying that some of the British humor is kind of lost to you. But do you see how maybe modern stand-up comedy and Rakugo could interact or like learn from each other? Or is there any kind of connection there?
Yeah. Number one, I'm not out to change Rakugo, so I don't think Rakugo needs to learn from stand-up comedy whatsoever. Also, stand-up comedy is its own animal. The first part of the Rakugo performance looks a lot like stand-up comedy, but we, unlike a lot of stand-up comedy, we eschew, we don't talk about politics, don't talk about religion, we don't talk about sex. We don't swear. It's very clean, very innocent kind of humor. We're taught with Rakugo to try to bring the audience together, try not to divide the audience. Whereas you'll hear a lot of stand-up comedians saying, if I got 10% of the audience mad at me, I'm at the perfect where I want to be. So it's a different ethos in that way. Now, that being said, there are some very clean stand-up comedians, and their way of presenting comedy would come a little bit closer to the ethos of Rakugo, perhaps. So stand-up comedy, like with Rakugo, we're doing all 1,000 of us are kind of doing the same thing in the same way. Within those parameters, there's a lot of variations, and that has to do with the personality of the Rakugo storyteller and the ability and the way of talking and that kind of thing. However, with stand-up comedy, like even for the traditional story, when I look left and when I look right, that's all decided, and every storyteller will do it the same way. So with stand-up comedy, everybody has very much their own kind of style in that way. So yeah, I don't know. Manzai, I think the style of Manzai could be very, very funny abroad in a different language. The actual content of Manzai is so rooted in Japan and Japanese like modern pop culture and that kind of thing that I don't think you could really. A lot of those routines would be very hard to translate. Maybe older Manzai, like Daisuke and Hanako Shisho, with their couple bickering and that kind of thing. That kind of thing could probably translate really well. But the actual style of, but we had Manzai in the States. Abbott and Costello, Who's on First? That's Manzai. I think that actually influenced Japanese Manzai, because Japanese Manzai used to be a religious ceremony around New Year's where the two would come to the house and they would sing and dance and chant some auspicious kind of ritualistic stuff. It wasn't even a comedic art form at the time. So Manzai developed into something that looks a lot more Western.
1,000 performers you mentioned. Is this
Yes.
a kind of growing trend? Is this
Yeah.
this art form kind of being kept alive and kind of
100%.
developing again?
Very much alive. Yep. Yep. And it used to be very much a men's world. And now I think maybe 10% of the storytellers are female, and that's growing every year. For a long time, there are no foreigners. Now there's 4 of us, I guess. So yeah, I think the heyday of Rakugo in the Edo period, there would have been the biggest number of theaters, and it would have been a much more important art form, entertainment art form in the consciousness of everyday Edo people, because maybe there wasn't so many choices of. I mean, you didn't have baseball, right? You didn't have the kind of entertainment you have. You didn't have TV. You didn't have internet, all that kind of thing. So there's way more choices now. That being said, it's by far the most number of professional storytellers in history, and that's just going up and up.
Traditionally performed in the theater, but nowadays also with social media, things are changing a little bit. You're able to share some of the Rakugo tradition on Instagram and so on. How is this influencing or kind of influencing each other, the development of Rakugo?
Yeah, well, Rakugo, but from the beginning of any kind of media, Rakugo has been part of the media. When people didn't have TVs but they only had radio, Rakugo was an ideal art form for radio, because you hear this conversation between characters and it's just like story time. So you didn't have to see it, but people would sit at home and listen to that. When records came out, Rakugo records came out. In fact, the Australian Rakugo storyteller that I told you about, Kairakte Braku, had quite an important role in bringing the first phonographs from Europe, I think from Germany. I'm not sure. I can't remember which country they came from, but he had an important role in bringing the first phonographs to Japan. And this is like late 1800s or early 1900s. And so because he was doing this business and helping do that, he took advantage and recorded his own Rakugo on a record. So I've heard him like over like 110 years ago. I've heard his actual Rakugo in Japanese. Yeah.
So you can hear Rakugo on the radio, you can hear it on records, you can find those old records if you look for them.
Yeah.
And if people want to see you perform, where can they go?
Yeah, they go to Instagram.
Instagram.
Instagram and TikTok.
And in person?
But in person, I perform every month in Tokyo. I have 10 shows a month in Tokyo. 1 week of every month, I'm in this one theater called Mokubate. And I'm performing in English, an afternoon show and an evening show. And I'm also in New York on Broadway at New World Stages is the name of the theater. I'm there once a month, and it's my 6th year.
Wow.
Who would have thought? That's a legitimate long-running show.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, I'm kind of proud of that. But yeah, it's awesome being on Broadway every month. It's a dream come true.
What's next for you? Was a dream come true? Do you have plans on kind of shows you want to do, places you want to perform at?
Yeah, I'd love to turn Rakugo into a Netflix comedy special. I think it would. I think it would be a nice variation on the stand-up comedy theme. If anyone from Netflix is listening,
yes, please reach out.
Yeah.
We'll make sure to have all the places where people can reach out to you and contact you in the description of the show.
100%.
Sunshine, thank you so much.
I should do before I leave. I should do a story for you.
Oh yes, if you have time, I would love to hear.
I've got a very short one,
all right.
so I'm sure I have time.
I have plenty of time. Yeah, let's go for it.
Yeah. So this is a really famous story that people that don't even know Rakugo, they know about this story, and it's about a little boy with a very long name. His name was Jugemu Goko no Surikire Kaijari Suigyo no Sungyo Matsu Ungyo Matsu Furai Matsu Kuneru Tokoro ni Sumu Tokoro Yabura Koji Bura Koji Paipo no Shuringan no Gurindai no Pompoko Pi no Pompoko na no Chokyu me no Chosuke. It was a very long name. One day, his neighbor, a little boy named Kin-chan, a shorter name, came to pick him up for school. And Kin-chan said, Jugemu, goko no surikire kaijari suiga, Sungyo matsu rai matsu kuneru tokoro ni tsumu tokoro, Yabura koji, paipo no shuringan no gurindai no pompoko pi no pompoko na no chokyu me no chosuke kun. Let's go to school. And Jugemu's mother came out and said, Arama Kin-chan, you're so nice, so kind of you. But our Jugemu, goko no surikire kaijari suiga, Sungyo matsu, kuneru tokoro ni tsumu tokoro, Yabura koji, paipo no shuringan no gurindai, pompoko pi no pompoko na no chokyu me no chosuke. Is sleeping. Wait here. I'll wake him up. Hey, Jigema goko no surikire kaijari suiga, Sungyo matsu, kuneru tokoro no tsumu tokoro, Yabura koji, paipo shuringan no gurindai, pompoko pi no pompoko na no chokyu me no chosuke. Wake up! Kin-chan is here to pick you up. I'm sorry, Kin-chan. Jugemu goko no surikire kaijari suiga, Sungyo matsu, furai matsu kuneru tokoro no tsumu tokoro, Yabura koji, paipo no shuringan no gurindai, ping kong kang kong. King Kong Kang Kong. Ma'am, his name was so long, school for today is already finished. Rakugo in a minute.
Fantastic.
Cheers.
It's so simple, and like we were discussing before, you don't need a translation, you don't need a different culture, everyone.
Yeah. No, direct translation is perfect. Yeah.
Thank you for performing. Thank you for coming and sharing your story. It was
my pleasure. Thank you for
super
having
insightful.
me.
Learned a lot about Rakugo, and I'm hoping to be able to come to see you at your show in Tokyo sometime soon.
Yeah, that'd be fantastic. Let me know.
Thank you everyone for listening and watching. This was Unpacking Japan, and we'll be back again next week. Bye. Thank you so much for joining us today. I hope you enjoyed this episode as much as I did. Please hit the subscribe button so you don't miss out on future conversations. And we'd love to hear from you. Share your thoughts in the comment section down below. And if you enjoyed this episode, here are a couple more that we think you'll enjoy. Thanks again for your support, and we'll see you next time.